You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
Oh, yes. Welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. That was another loss for the Brooklyn Nets at the hands of the Phoenix Suns. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day and remind you that today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Check out prizepicks.com and use promo code NBA or go to your app store and download the app today. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Doug, 121. 111, the Nets lose to the Suns on the road. We're going to get into all the key sequences, some philosophical questions from yours truly, and then maybe some definitive statements around members of the Brooklyn Nets. But let's dive in on how we're feeling after what was a difficult loss on the road, tying a season-high losing streak for the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah, I'm really conflicted about this one because on the one hand, I'm starting to live a little too much with the wins and losses, like on an emotional level, in a way that we really haven't really had to do since the playoffs of last year, I feel like, right? Like, I don't feel like I've hinged a lot of emotional weight on individual games, wins and losses. We've been afforded that We've been afforded that opportunity by the Nets, just frankly having been really good record-wise over the last 2 years. And now we're getting into this super dicey situation where they're coming kind of close to the danger point. And this one, and so I'm trying to remove that part from like this actual just singular game.
Right.
Because on a game level, it's hard to go nuts with a lot of what the Nets did here. I think there's some specific stuff we're clearly going to point to that the game ended up hinging on. Mm-hmm. But you can't give them an F. They went into Phoenix, a full strength Phoenix team that had Ayton back, that's basically won every single game this year and didn't look like it could miss early. And they were in this game until relatively the end. So, what do you say? I think in general, if you are a right-minded, non-emotional person, like I'm having trouble being right now, you would say, oh, not too bad, right? Like, hung with a team that's got championship aspirations also, and we were down our best guy. And at the same time, they lost, and now they're like a game and a half out of the playing game. So, this is like the emotional swings for me are pretty wide right now.
We talk about, right? No, there's no moral victories, and yet playing Golden State and then playing Phoenix and feeling like you hung with them, played well, and lost. So you like to be able to pick those up. And again, we mentioned it last time where this is what we pointed to, the concerns around once Kevin Durant goes down with that injury. We said even before that, but specifically once he goes down and you looked at the schedule, you started to say it's hard to look at these games and go, hey, a lot of positives to take out of these losses because of the razor thin margins you're dealing with. I guess if we want to go a deeper silver lining, it's like you're looking around and watching other teams around the East and going, oh, some people are struggling, and that certainly helps us as we hover around that 6 seed mark, knowing that 5 and above looks like that's probably going to become further and further entrenched as we move along here. So yeah, it's hard, but I'm going to make some other, like I said, definitive statements during this podcast that I need to have kind of receipts held against me later as the season unfolds here.
Ooh, I'll keep some receipts. That's good.
But I am of the mindset of feeling okay coming out of this game. And it's probably because of the bar that was set from an expectation standpoint coming into it, that you're then able to on the back end go, oh, well, I kind of thought we were going to get blown out. So that worked out pretty good.
It's important to remember as like a sports fan, and really about anything that carries like sort of emotional weight behind it, is you have to go back. And this is why I said, want to take a steady hand to begin with, because sometimes not sometimes, all the time, your previous thoughts are going to play in around what your current feeling is. Right. Yep. And you could dial the meter up and down a little bit, but what you thought before the game is going to play a lot into how you feel about it later. It's going to make you way more excited about the win, let's say, or way less excited about, or way angrier at the loss. By the way, if you want to keep your sanity, don't look what Golden State just did tonight, which was sit all their guys and still beat San Antonio on the road with the absolute B team. So
couldn't risk that against the Nets, though. You see, that's another.
We've done that 2 games ago.
Victory.
Jeez, whatever. I can see why they didn't.
So I think made it back just in time for this one, by the way.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, so I think that. Look, there's a lot to not like about this game, and there's a real world where you can say to yourself, this was a winnable game again for the Nets. The Golden State game was the same way. That was a totally winnable game for the Nets, and they did not win. This, again, was a totally winnable game for the Nets, and they didn't win. And from that level, you can't be anything but very, very frustrated. And now when you combine it to see, okay, well, now it's the 5th loss in a row. Now they're, really starting to drop in the standings in a very meaningful / scary way. This is where the emotions start dialing up a little bit more. And I think that as Nets fans, I think 2 things need to happen. One is you need to be like less like me right now. Maybe I'm just saying this to myself, like less hinge everything on every single game, because that is not a good approach.
Yeah.
But you can also start taking away things that need to be fundamentally changed, or things that are kind of working well in spite of continuing to lose. And I think that's what we're going to look at in a second here, is like what things kind of conspired against the Nets, both from their own doing and their not doing, and also things that like I think we can take away from this thing and say, oh, that's a positive, and things we can take away and say, oh, that's a negative. And I think that's kind of where we need to live right now, because to not live like that will probably be tearing your hair out over the short term, because just over the last season, we just haven't been in this kind of situation, which is perilously close to like real kind of freak out mode after, again, they lose their 5th in a row.
And by the way, because Steve Nash has been a theme here, we're not going to really get into him too much over the course.
I spent all day on Steve Nash today. It was a full Nash.
You got into it. You had a heck of an experience. I was watching it from afar, but my point was just going to be, even seeing some of the interactions on Twitter, whether through you or other fans commenting, and I was having some conversations, and most of them were pleasant, but there was this weird thing of, and this again is where I'm going to keep pointing back to, take away some of the positives and maybe, yes, devalue some of the negatives that you see over these games when the Nets aren't healthy, because in the back of your mind, you still have to say, we are ultimately going to get healthy. That has to be what everything gets couched in. It all has to run through the filter of, this team will be healthy by the end of the year, and we will get a chance to enter the playoffs the way we thought we were always going to when this all began, with a healthy roster, 3 incredibly high-level talents, and some really great supporting players around them. Even the Steve Nash piece is just the idea of, remember, someone mentioned going back, this has been a year and a half now with Steve Nash and too many issues, problems, etc. And it did trigger this thought that I responded with of, yeah, but you would never sit here and say, with less than 20 games of the big 3 together on the court, no one's standing here saying like, Kevin Durant, have you really accomplished what we expected you to do over the last year and a half? That's not happening for the players. It's not happening for the results on the court. And I think that, again, you have to put everything underneath this umbrella. And for all the slings and arrows that you took in some of the comments, somehow I think people detached it, which I thought was beautiful. And then we'll move on from this. A lot of people detached it from between you and me. They were very focused on you having an opinion around Steve Nash.
Buddy, I'm bulletproof. I'm totally bulletproof. So I don't really care. Like, it's fine.
No. But it is this theme of, I think you're looking for, we talked about this, you're looking for something to be frustrated by, and we get it. And it's very easy to pull on obvious threads like the head coach, as opposed to looking at any player, because we can always sit here and step back and say injuries, etc., timing, blah, blah, blah. This is why we're never going to overly worry about the product until playoff time when they're healthy. But other things, something has to be a breathing spot for us. And that's where you kind of drive, I think, some of your ire. Let's get into then some of the key sequences specifically from this game, trends that happened throughout the course of it, where the Nets hurt themselves, and where maybe some other factors came into play. Before we do, though, got to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. That's because if you're a NBA fan, I like to think that you are, you need to be looking for some daily fantasy action. Obviously, you got to try the award-winning app. Prize Picks is your daily fantasy made easy. I'm enjoying the heck out of it, and I know you're going to as well. You pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times of any early entry, and it's just you versus the projected numbers. You're not scrambling against all these other odd shark mavens. No, you pick the best lineup you think you have going for you, and you have the opportunity to have entries that can be made in less than 60 seconds. It's that easy. Prize Picks is safe and offers fast withdrawals as well. Use the award-winning app on both App Store and Google Play. Prize Picks offers a variety of options. You can do everything, including props around points scored to rebounds and steals. Hopefully, you did not go with James Johnson. That could have been awkward for you tonight. But Prize Picks allows you to make sports entries for, of course, maybe the Brooklyn Nets podcast, if you like any of those teams or players that have been going on over there. you want to head over, and for a limited time, Prize Picks will give you an exclusive no-brainer offer for all of our users. You get $50 for free if you use a player in your first Prize Pick entry and he scores a single point. It's essentially 50 free bucks, but you must use the promo code NBA. That's right. It's an exclusive offer available for Locked On fans. Sign up today and use the promo code NBA for $50 free if a player that you utilize scores a single point.
We're done with that. You got to start thinking about tax season, folks. People think it's unusual circumstances can mean complicated taxes. That can be true, but that's not to worry about because TurboTax Live experts, that is where they can help make things interesting. Everyone's got unique lives. You might have invested for crypto for the first time this year, hopefully. You own, except for recently, own an up-and-coming small business, check, or are raising rambunctious kids, check, double check. Luckily, TurboTax Live has experts who can answer your tax question, walk you through the whole process, or do your taxes from start to finish. There you go. You want these things done and done right. They help you get every deduction you deserve, no matter your unique situation. You can talk to TurboTax Live experts through your phone or computer without leaving your house. Look, these guys and gals love to do this. Why not just turn this situation over to the professionals? TurboTax Live experts are here to help you however you need. And if you need an extra hand your taxes off to them. They'll do it all for you. There you go. TurboTax Live experts can mean an interesting life turns into an even greater refund. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. You do your thing. They've got your taxes into it. TurboTax Live.
All right, so now focusing on this game, some I think early trends and sequences that happened throughout this that kind of led to the Brooklyn Nets' demise. Some very very questionable ones that, as you say, swinging on the pendulum of just going from being like, well, it's over. Hold on a second now. Maybe they're back in it. Nope. I think it's actually over here. I think quickly before we do, because we're not going to cover too much, I think, inside the box score here. It was another incredibly strong game from Kyrie Irving, 10 of 20 from the field, really stepped up in a lot of the big spots, hit a lot. He's been hitting, it feels like, more and more acrobatic perimeter shots on a consistent basis out of necessity than I've seen him in recent years as well. So he's been absolutely electric. Good game from Harden as well. But 72% from the field in the first quarter for the Phoenix Suns. That felt like a jumping off point. And by the way, it wasn't necessarily for anything that the Nets were or were not doing, shy of maybe they should have been literally inside Cam Johnson's shorts when he was taking perimeter looks, I guess would be the first step.
Yeah, I'd push back a little bit on that because I think there were a few defensive failings. I think the Nets had a plan to kind of like, because with the Suns, you have to pick your poison because Chris Paul and company are just so good at pick and roll. Like they can run the two-man action between Paul and Booker. They can run that stuff between Paul and Ayton. He's an absolute assassin when it comes to that and can pick defenses apart. At that point, you kind of do just need to kind of choose a path. I think the Nets chose to try switching. That wasn't totally great. They used Claxton in those situations. That didn't really totally work. But like they did sort of pinch a lot on defense, and that is just going to open up more shots from the outside. And then you're kind of saying, look, like we can't have both ways. Like we can't play like paint specific pick and roll defense and try to completely take that away without giving up a little something else. And what they gave up were a lot of kind of open look threes. The Suns are really good about finding those guys. They have incredible spacing because they have multiple guys that can hit the three. So I think we just saw that. It's like, yeah, there's a reason this team has lost single digits games. Like we saw it. Why, right? Like they find the thing you're doing and they do the other thing. And that's kind of what the Nets did. And I can't fault that strategy because there's worlds where, you know, they knock down 25% of those threes in the first quarter and you're right back in it. So I think that's the only reason I was like, oh, Cam Johnson. It wasn't all just like he was hitting these acrobatic fall away threes. Like a lot of them were incredibly good looks.
Yeah.
And I thought the defensive strategy was kind of like, well, this is just what you need to do. And I didn't even think that was really the key to the game because I think there was just other stuff that happened here.
Well, yeah, and I think you encapsulated it properly. It's not that the rotation pieces defensively didn't have lapses at times, especially in that first quarter, but that you were picking that poison and kind of living with it. Now, you maybe would have preferred that the switching was better, but you kind of made that active decision out of the start. To your point, the Nets were still in the game after the first quarter. They were, in spite of giving up 72% from the field. And, very early in this one, they had it where the Nets were 5 of 6 from the field in the first quarter, and Phoenix was 11 of 12. And it was like, well, bang, there's the shot disparity that we always talk about with the Brooklyn Nets. They always seem to struggle with that. So even when you're shooting a high percentage and you're still in the game, it just feels like opportunities come too far and far and frequently for a good team like the Phoenix Suns, and that's going to be hard to build out of. But even beyond that, I mean, I don't want to jump around in the game too much here. Are there other sequences before we get to jumping off in the fourth quarter, 60 seconds, 4 fouls for Brooklyn, and that seems to also set a very bad tone as you're trying to keep yourself in this game?
Yeah, so rather than go through each sequence, I think sort of the theme of this game was that this game ebbed and flowed in really weird ways, right? Like there was tons of times where the Nets definitely could have just rolled over and died because it was looking really bad, and they didn't. Like they continued to fight back time after time when a lot of things, like I said, were conspiring against them. So I want to point out that first, like there's no one specific run. They just made multiple runs like this game, right? Like they got down by 10, pull it back within 5, like get it down by 7, get back within 2. Like they had this stuff that was going this way. I mean, I guess we could just talk about the refs first. Like the refereeing in this game was super suspect for sure. There were an incredible amount of missed calls, some very high profile ones, like the JaVale McGee. Okay, let's talk about this sequence. The JaVale McGee, pretty clear goaltending down to the other end where the goaltending is probably correct, but it looks worse because they had just missed one of them. And that's the one where you're a Nets fan. This is kind of like what I mean before about managing your emotions. Like as a Nets fan, you can start looking at those two situations and be like, of course, right?
Yeah.
Like, of course this happens. Of course they missed the goaltending on one end and it just happens to be a goaltend on the other. Again, that goaltend was correct. Kessler touched the ball while it was on the rim. Like that was a goaltend. But it was sequences like this, and there were many of these where you think to yourself, it's just all going wrong, right? Like the fouls are going only one way and not us. Like, right. I think that's kind of the theme. It's like this, you start to feel like you're a little, not cursed, because that's like too over the board, but like a little snake bit here, right? It's like these things just seem to be going weirdly the wrong ways. Like Harden seems like he's drawing a lot of fouls and not getting them. And the Nets lose the foul battle by what seems like double or something. It wasn't double, but does that make sense what I'm saying? It was 27-19. Like, does that make sense what I'm saying? And yeah, those 4 fouls in there were all fouls. It were incredibly stupid plays.
Well, no, yeah, 100%. It makes sense what you're saying because, by the way, it's like there's the up and under from Kyrie Irving that he misses at the rim. Claxton's right there and can't put it back up in. You mentioned it when we were kind of reminiscing before we started the show of Kyrie saves the ball from going out of bounds, throws it for Harden, and it just bounces out ahead of him. Everyone's going in transition. It's an easy bucket for Phoenix right underneath there. But even to your point about the goaltending, it's like, that sequence happens, it ends up being this big swing, ultimately over a few possessions where you go, boy, what could have been a 2-point game became a 7-point game all of a sudden over a couple sequences. But the Nets came back from that. And I think like it's also worth highlighting, like against Golden State Warriors, even without Harden, they have Harden back, you have Kyrie out there. You saw the bench, they were up and completely involved in every single defensive sequence. Like you can see that the Nets, it's like this theme here of like moral victories. Like they're looking for the moral victories, I think, on a night in, night out basis, and maybe even a little bit, while they're not going to say it in post games. Like, we can feel good about the fact that we could have gotten these ones. And I know they want the wins, but they are dug in for those. And that's where I think, in spite of the loss, you can look at these rally sequences that they went through and say, dude, you could roll over and die on every one of these games, even if it's a bad team that you're playing against, because you're so shorthanded and all these little things that are going against you. And also in these games where it feels like a lot of the foul calls are there to be had, the James Harden piece certainly seems to keep coming back up to it, where you're like, hey, if you're gonna call the fouls, I'm good with it. But it does feel like James Harden is looking for them and not getting them, and sometimes they're there. And then you said they pick up all 4 of those ones in the fourth quarter. They're all real fouls. There's some frustration ones there as well, and that's, I think, the cumulative effect of this, where the Nets are building up in their frustration, and then that happens by the 11-minute mark. They're in the fouls, and by the way, they even managed to navigate that and still be down single digits late in the game. So it's like every time that you could point to something in this and say, that's pretty brutal, the Nets overcame that. And that's where I dismiss those issues of the game and move the part of, you probably should have still been able to come back and maybe have a real chance to win this one down the stretch.
Yeah, like he has legit
jacked
gripes.
up,
Like
I
he should
apologize,
have.
yeah.
It's okay. Like he has legit. Harden has legit gripes about getting to the rim. Kyrie actually probably had at least two true gripes. He's just not as trained to like argue with the refs. He's not as much of a complainer about this stuff. Like
His
Harden's like
athleticism and his body contortion, I think, is a detriment to him getting foul calls more often.
same with Harden. Like same with Harden. Frankly, like there's his and it's a little different with Harden because like his sheer strength around the rim makes it appear like he didn't get fouled at times. Like he can feel the contact, but it doesn't look like he absorbed it all the time. Look, he made a career out of pretending to absorb the contact, so I can kind of get why people are a little gun shy still around doing it. But it doesn't take away from the fact that like these two guys are so good at finishing near the rim, but in totally different ways that they are absorbing lots of contact, but they would never appear as if they did because they're still able to get up actually like kind of good shots in that scenario. And so it can give you the sense of they're not getting fouled. It's not an excuse for the refs. Like there's some clear misses here. And then you get on the other, it's funny too, because if you want to juxtapose this situation, look on the other end where Chris Paul gets a clear rip through. Again, it's a foul. Like you're allowed to do it. But you're like, oh, okay, this is sort of the difference of what's happening here. Like he does the clear, in no way is this a basketball play move. Like there's just no. I get why he does it. Like he's trained everyone to have it be a foul. Harden made a career off this. It's fine, but it is funny to see that situation and do this thing where like throw your hands up again. You're like awesome. Like this is happening over here. It's not a real basketball move. And then over here, it's like these guys are getting hammered, but they're so freaking good. It doesn't look like they are. And so now we're all going nuts about it. So yeah. Anyway,
it's also by the way a game where Blake Griffin's actually hitting some 3-pointers, and that's where you feel like you really wasted an opportunity. Can I tell you
that I took time to look up just for fun because I thought it'd be like such a stupid stat to put out there because I usually hate these stats to look up how many when Blake had hit 2 or more threes in a game, what the Nets record was. He's done it. I'll tell you right now, and then I'll hit Billbar. He's done it 15 times in his career. You want to guess what his Nets career? Like you want to guess the record in games where he's hit 2 or more threes? Oh, I didn't count this one. Okay, so 16 games. What his record is when he's hit 2 or more threes? What the team's record is?
3-13.
10-6.
Oh, excuse me. So then we blew it.
Again, hashtag it doesn't matter. But but I just thought that'd be such a funny thing to be like, because I was really hoping it was like 15-0 or some stupid number. All right, I'll make myself feel better here. I got to talk to you about our friends over at Billbar. New year. That means New Year's resolutions. I'm trying to stick to mine. Haven't been as good in the last couple days, but we'll get back on the old horse. We'll start by getting back into Billbar. Billbar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. It's even better than a candy bar because it's got the stats, the health stats that actually back it up. You want to eat healthy. It just can get kind of boring at times. I know what that feels like. By week 3 or 4 of those resolutions, you're thinking it's just not worth it. Why don't we grab a little chocolate in our diet? No problem. Built Bar's got you covered there. They're 100% covered in real chocolate with the stats to back it up. Just 4 grams of sugar, just 4 net carbs, 130 calories, 17 grams of protein. I could compare that to the candy bar right now, but you'd be so disgusted by how bad the candy bar is for you. I'm not even going to read it for you. If you're not a huge fan of working out, you can at least eat something that tastes good and good for you. That is when you go for the Built Bar. Grab some of those flavors too. Peanut butter brownie, raspberry, cookies and cream, salted caramel, mint brownie, and more. Go to built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off of your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com.
Okay. So here's the deal. Receipt time. And we actually touched on it a little bit there in the last segment, Blake Griffin and then 3-pointers. Couple of things I took away from this game. If again, and this is also an overarching theme. I mean, tell everybody right now. We talked a little bit about the deadline coming up, speculative ideas, and Claxton. I mentioned Cam Thomas last episode. I'm getting back into my proper lane here, and I'm staying with it over the remainder of the season. And it starts with James Harden is it's fine. The James Harden conundrum is solved. I stand by the fact that the hamstring hampered him at the start of the season. He missed time with COVID protocols. He's had the wrist injury. Like some things have slowed him down, including his own metabolism probably from being fully where he needs to be for the playoff push. And maybe he'll never get there. But right now, what this game showed me was James Harden's just going to need some rest over the back end of this season. Because when he's on back fresh, he looks like James Harden. When he gets worn down and you're playing him 40, 45 minutes a game, he starts to look a little bit more like hero ball Houston Rockets James Harden, which he doesn't need to be anymore. So that's my first definitive statement. Put it in your pocket. I know you agree with me, but feel free.
Yeah, no, I think that like it's just gonna be. I think that's probably where we are in his age curve / his just like health curve right now. It's just he's just can't. He's just still playing an incredible amount of minutes, like 38 per game over the course of January. So, like that's just a way bigger load than nearly any other player in the league. Like fatigue, of course, would be a factor in that situation. I will say that his January was much. There's a few fewer games in here, but his January was mostly better than his December. Like 33% from three as compared to 27%. Scoring a little bit down, but the minutes were down too. So it's like kind of in line. It's just about in line with where the minutes were. So like from an efficiency standpoint, he was right basically the same on the assist point. So I think for the most part, I'm with you. I think what we're seeing from James Harden is probably we're going to get, and is definitely good enough, with hopes that it kind of gets a little better as he continues to get in shape over the course of the season, which you continue to hope. So I think I'm there with you. I still think we're not getting anything close to like peak Houston Harden.
No.
But I think we probably need to reduce the expectation off that too. So once you do that, then I think it's fine. And I'm not trying to move the goalposts here, but I think I agree with you.
I think he slotted into the wheelhouse. Quick tip of the hat to Kessler Edwards. He's now picked up significant matchups in the last two games. Steph Curry picks up Booker in this one. He's guarding all across the board here. I'd said he's the 5th most important player on the team. I don't know. Maybe he's 4th now. Like there's just this world where he matters more than perimeter shooters that can knock down threes like Patty Mills, as good as he's been because of what he does on both ends. Blake Griffin's the other guy.
Oh, real quick, I would say like in this game here, without some of the other key players, like he is the 4th most important player. Like after Irving, Harden, you can maybe even make it close on Mills because just how good the defense has been. So maybe you can he can get as high as 3rd. So I definitely agree with you.
And then Blake Griffin, it's just that when this team is healthy, we've talked about some of these veterans and stuff. And this is a good example. It's not even about the scoring. It's not knocking down the triples. He has a very specific role for this team. You don't the Paul Millsap experiment never happened. That's going to go by the wayside. LaMarcus Aldridge isn't a physical player. Claxton's not a physical player. Obviously, Day'Ron Sharpe can maybe do something for you. But Griffin's a savvy, defensive veteran player. He knows where to be on the floor. He's effective in his role. And if and when the team gets healthy, I think he's going to look even more valuable. So this has been important to remind us that he's not the same guy he was last year. And also, he's still just as important as he was last year. This isn't Bruce Brown, where it feels like something is lost there and he's never going to find himself back into a role. Blake Griffin is still crucial for this team, and I'm going to stick to that the remainder of the season as well.
Yeah, he was pretty important this one. The physicality was definitely needed in this matchup because like Phoenix is also like a little sneaky physical down low. Like they have some big guys. They do not basically don't take a center off the court the whole game between Ayton and Biyombo. And so like you do need a little bit of strength. And while Ayton, McGee, and Biyombo.
Yeah.
And like while Blake isn't the biggest guy in the world, he's at least pretty strong. And so, there are certain matchups where you kind of need him to be able to hold up. That's what we saw early in the year too, when he's playing a lot of these center minutes. Like he just needs to be able to hold up for extended stretches against guys that are bigger than him. And for the most part, he can. Probably not at a championship level defensively, but for a regular season innings eater, like for sure. And it's not going to work in every matchup, but I can see why it kind of worked in this one.
Yeah, no, again, and it's again, that's the same thing about a lot of these guys on this team. Supporting cast members only need to serve their purpose in the matchups where it matters most, and I think Blake Griffin's still capable of doing that.
And by the way, I'll credit Nash, like going to Blake in those minutes instead of Claxton, because the Claxton thing just wasn't working.
Yep.
I think that actually was like pretty good. Like a pretty good move to kind of switch that over. It looked a lot better because Blake hit a couple of those threes and that helped him. But in general, I thought he held up fine once they sort of switched the scheme away from like all the switching around Claxton around the perimeter, which kudos to him, but it just really wasn't working. So anyway, yeah. Okay. Well, who was your next one?
No, that's really the case for me here. The Nets are still finding themselves a game and a half up on Charlotte in the 7th spot. They're 2.5 up on Toronto there in the 8th spot. Should I save philosophical question around narratives in the NBA, or do you want to sneak it in?
No, sneak it in. Let's do it because we're gonna post game tomorrow after the Kings game. So,
that's true. We won't have any time for it. So much of what's gone on over the first half of the season, and let's say over the last month and a half around the Brooklyn Nets, everybody in and out of the lineups, the Kyrie situation, now the injury with Kevin Durant. The NBA narrative is that the Nets are going to go through a hard patch here. They're going to have really difficult matchups, and there's a low expectation that they're going to be able to win those games. Do you think that when there is that narrative kind of set, that it does bleed into the way games can get called and maybe the way that referees approach it. Now, ultimately, they're supposed to lose these matchups, but it feels like we have had a little bit more of an uptrend in recent games where the Nets do seem to be on the wrong side of toss-up calls more often than not. Like, I would say it seems like they're getting a bad beat more than they're getting the lucky breaks. Is that fair?
Okay, so I think that is tough to evaluate because we tend to watch the game through one specific lens, which is through the Nets lens, right? And like this is the sort of time-honored hallmark of local sports team like coverage and fandom and stuff is that you only look through the game through the one lens. If you were able to sit next to a Phoenix or an opposing fan the entire game, and that's how you watched every game, you almost for sure would have a different view of the game, right? Like, so I think I have to start there and try to be rational around it because on the one hand, I want to agree with you like really quickly and be like, God, they're so snake bit. The thing is, like every fan base thinks they're snake bit, and so once you get to that point, you like
option B is are referees kind of equally terrible with consistency?
Okay, so they were bad tonight, but like the Nets again didn't do themselves any favors. Like at some point, you have to be looking out for these guys. Were just a hack of guys. Like they hacked guys. Those 4 fouls in that one possession were legit fouls, every single one of them.
Oh, just because Bembry piggybacked on somebody underneath the basket, big deal. Calling fouls,
and they just had some brutal and ones, totally terrible guys just running free to the rim where you stick your hand out and never works 100 times out of 100. The guys are too strong, they finish, and you just get this like the easiest and ones ever. So yes, calls definitely went their way. Now I will say calls going your way going against you can probably have a demoralizing effect.
Yeah.
And to the point where your frustration level grows. And like, that's probably the narrative. But I don't think there's a narrative around like one-sidedness. I think sometimes it'll seem like it's happening. It definitely seemed like it was happening tonight. And I think usually what happens as a byproduct of that is you just become incredibly frustrated, rightfully so. And then you're just a little bit more out of control. And so I don't know.
Yeah, half a step late, willing to reach in, even though you know it's going to be a bucket.
You're just pissed off. You're like, well, this wasn't a foul before, so like, what the hell? Like, I'll just do this other thing. Like this last thing, and we'll get out of here. But the Nets were in the bonus. Excuse me, the Suns were in the bonus from a really early part, and it actually until the very end didn't kill them like they actually got a little more disciplined at that point, and it wasn't so like and so
Nets got themselves into the bonus like at the 5.5 minute mark of the fourth quarter. They put
it was way earlier than that.
No. Anyway. They put the Suns in the bonus at the 11-minute mark. The Suns were in the bonus for the 11-minute mark.
Gotcha. I misheard.
Then the Nets picked it back up. And to your point, that's where it was. That's something that went against you. You were frustrated. You still navigated a difficult stretch, got yourself into the bonus too, and then you were back on even footing. And then you still committed some of those clumsy and frustration fouls. I think in the end, one started to pile up. But it's again, so it's always a curious piece because I think you're right. When you look at it inside out, looking at your team, the team that you cover, the team that you root for, it's always nothing's going our way. I'm sure there's plenty of fan bases that would say, well, you should watch one of these Suns games when they're on the road and they're getting beaten up and Chris Paul can't pick up a foul for his life, even if he does windmill through. So anyway,
that's just like the history of sports fandom, frankly. It's just like, that's just, like I said, like a time-honored tradition. You think your team is you think everyone hates your team. You're the bad guy. Everyone hates you.
You heard it here first. Doug said Nets got robbed.
I'd be shocked if that was the case. I'd be shocked if that was the case. Like all 30 teams were the most hated and the most screwed. Like that would be a number that didn't really seem to compute. But anyway, okay, we're gonna get out of here. We'll be back after the Kings game tomorrow night. Another West Coast tilt. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over to YouTube. Jump in the comments. Tons of commenters from yesterday's episode.
We're trying to keep up. We really are.
I put in a day, buddy. I put in an absolute day with these comments on Twitter today. So, Eddie, you want to throw something out on Twitter? It's at Doug Norrie. It's at Adam Armbrecht. If you want to go, even better, go subscribe to the podcast. Tune in every day. Argue with us to your heart's delight. I'll put the link in the show notes for the Locked On Nets YouTube channel.
Let's just stay even keeled, my friends. When you've completed what you thought you had to do and your blood's depleted to the point of stable glue, then you'll get along, and then you'll get along. Steady as she goes. The Raconteurs.
Raconteurs. There we go. One of these
Jack White.
Some of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn.